O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Maui Nui is on a mission to help balance axis deer populations for the good of our environment, communities, and food systems on the island of Maui. They've shared over 126,000 pounds of nutrient-dense protein with the Maui community. Secure your spot now. Become a snack subscriber and join in helping to build more resilient food and ecosystems on Maui. Visit MauiNuiVenison.com. That's MAUINUI venison.com and use promo code BEAR for 20% off your first order.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
My name is Clay Newcomb, and this is a production of the Bear Grease podcast called the Bear Grease Render, where we render down, dive deeper, and look behind the scenes of the actual Bear Grease podcast. Presented by FHF Gear, American-made, purpose-built hunting and fishing gear that's designed to be as rugged as the places we explore. What you got in your hand there, Dan?
Ultralight titanium revolver.
Wrist breaker.
It's a Taurus 44 Magnum. That's what it is.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, that thing's made of titanium, super light.
Man, it's a gorgeous gun.
Bucks like a mule.
Yeah,
but that's a good bear gun. Man. Hey, welcome to the Bear Grease Render. My oh my, do we ever have a production today? Man, we have two new people in the room today at the global headquarters. Two new people, and we traditionally introduce the new people at the end so it's like suspenseful of what's going to be happening. Landbridge is cocking the gun now.
Hey, I have a Landbridge too. It's just still submerged.
It's making us a little nervous. Okay.
Welcome to America.
First of all, Gary Newcomb is not here. Man, it's too bad.
Is he on the dozer?
He's building the barn. He's not on the dozer. Oh man, I got some stories about a dozer. And Misty Newcomb was going to be here. She had to bail for professional reasons, and she was very quickly replaced.
Oh, wow.
Now that
substituted.
She was very quickly substituted. Yes.
It makes me wonder who was the substitution.
She's irreplaceable.
That's right.
I mean, who was it?
Who'd you have on speed dial?
Well, I'll tell that. So, to my right, I have Mr. Brent Reeves. Brent, good to see you.
Hey, buddy. Nice hat.
Thanks, man. I got a new hat. Dr. Daniel Roop.
Good to be here.
Fantastic to see you.
It's good for you to see me. I have.
Dan's got a new bow.
Oh, sweet.
It's absolutely wonderful.
What is it?
Yeah, it's a Matthews.
Oh.
I don't actually know what kind it is. What kind is it?
VXR. Matthews VXR.
Slick.
Yeah.
Smooth.
Absolutely
quiet,
phenomenal.
Landbridge Spillmaker.
I'm here.
Man, guys, let's just give him a round of applause.
Way to go. Golf clap.
You made it on the Bear Grease podcast.
Bow. So, everyone, I'm bowing.
Yeah. I mean,
I thought you wanted us to bow to you.
Yeah. not just on the podcast, but starting the podcast off.
Yeah. You came in
place
hot.
Of honor.
You came in hot
with my Daniel Boone song,
and it was brilliant. And that was totally unplanned. I walked in the place where Josh works and just literally stuck a microphone in his face.
I was going to ask.
That is what came out.
Did he know you were recording him, and how often do you record us apart from our knowledge?
If I
That'll come
ever
up
give
in
you a
court.
consent paper to sign,
Just
it's
sign it.
and don't
If he
show
leans his chest pocket toward you while he's talking,
Yeah.
it might be a good sign.
Yeah. No, Josh came in hot with the song of Daniel Boone, which I really was shocked because I had just dug up that Daniel Boone song just a few days before, and honestly, I never saw that
TV show?
That TV show,
It was awesome.
Gosh.
the Daniel Boone TV
Fess
show.
Parker
Really?
in a role that will astound you.
Yes,
And
So,
typecast
man,
him forever.
We're going to talk
Exactly.
about that more. Directly to Josh's right is a voice that you've heard before, coming in hot
Yeah.
from the Bear Hunting Magazine Global Headquarters, Kolby Morehead.
Enter the
Here's
bear
Kolby.
tech.
Yep, Kolby the Bear Tech
I need
Morehead.
to try your voice.
Hey, so for people that wouldn't, many of you might be familiar with Kolby from my former podcast, the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. Kolby works for me at Bear Hunting Magazine. Kolby is the genius behind Bear Hunting Magazine. He does a ton of stuff.
He's the
for
wind
us.
beneath your wings.
Kolby
Don't
Morehead
sing that.
is the wind beneath my wings.
Is Kolby the man who can get me
Kolby.
Kolby? I'm sorry, Kolby.
Uh-huh.
Is Kolby the man who can get me a bandit hat?
Whoa, that's a big ask. We'll talk later. No, great to have you, Kolby.
Back alley band.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then to Colby's right, hey, we're going to call Seth our guest of honor.
I would.
Okay.
I
Definitely.
appreciate that. I
You'll take
appreciate
it.
that.
This is most of us know Seth from other places, but this is my friend Seth Haines. And Seth had a home run performance on the Bear Grease
I'll say.
podcast.
It was at least a solid double.
It was
at least a solid double.
It was a solid double. Yeah, Tony Gwynn double.
It was a
That's
Tony
right.
Gwynn double. I'll take him all day long.
Yeah, yeah. No, so Seth, a couple of years ago, well, maybe not even a couple of years ago, a year ago, told me I ought to get this book on archetypes, branding archetypes. What's the name of the
The
book?
Hero and the Outlaw.
Yeah, people are going to ask. The
Amazing
Hero
book.
and the Outlaw.
Amazing book.
And so what do I do when smart people tell me what to do?
I hope you
Just
do
take
it.
a guess.
Look the other
You
way.
don't do it.
I do what they say, Brett. So
I
what did
guess.
I do? I got the book, and to be honest with you, I didn't finish it.
That's okay. That's all right. As long as you read the ones that pertain to you,
Yeah.
like anything in personality, you're fine.
Now, wait
Well-
a minute. Wait a minute. I told you to read a book like 2 years ago. You still ain't read it.
I
What category does that put
the
That
book,
means you're
and I
not
started
smart.
it.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. Of the 9 archetypes, which one corresponds to Clay Newcomb?
Dozer, the dozer.
The dozer
That is
operator.
not one of the 9 archetypes.
It's 12, but we can get into that later.
12,
We can
okay.
get into that.
Still 12, Daniel.
Some might
don't like
say
3
the
of
just the clown. I don't
It
know.
would be interesting to talk about some of the archetypes because
We can do
they
it.
surprised me.
We can do it.
But no, so I started researching Boone, and so I read this Boone by Robert Morgan 10 years ago. And you know who told me to read that book?
Who told
A
you?
man that I didn't even know at the time, which was Steve Ranella. It was on one of his book lists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 10, 12 years ago. And I got it,
Hope
read
you're
it,
listening, Steve.
and I read the Boone book, and they started talking about Boone as an archetype, which as they began to describe that, I began to recognize Boone holding this place kind of in our culture that was like kind of unusual, just like this. It's like, why is this guy here? And they started talking about archetypes. And then a year ago, Seth had me read about archetypes, and then that's why I interviewed Seth. And I think it's really important to understand. You probably could have polled Bear Grease podcast listeners and said, what is an archetype? And maybe many of them would have been able to kind of describe it. Like I kind of would have known what it meant. But when you really know what they mean, Seth and I were talking the other day, you start to see archetypes all over your life. And you see these places, and anyway, it's interesting. So good to have you,
Yeah,
Seth.
everyone you know is I'm probably an archetype to you of something, which maybe
Right.
we could talk about that later. I don't know.
Yeah, so
Maybe I
there's
don't
like
have an
scales of archetypes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it was a good time. I've enjoyed it. And I'm glad to be here with all of you archetypes, especially you, Josh.
Wow.
Singled out.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the
Hey,
12 are.
Seth,
I'm interested to know.
I did not choose that Seth was the cold open. That was a surprise to me. That's the one part of the podcast that I don't put my hands on, I let Phil Taylor do what Phil Taylor does at Meat
he
Eater.
does a good job.
I always say in this.
I was riveted when I heard Seth's voice. I was riveted.
No, I loved it, and see, that's why it's good to have. Like, I was expecting like some gritty fact about Boone, like killing a bear or something.
I heard Seth's voice and I thought, finally, they've replaced Clay with somebody who sounds good.
My name's Seth Haines. I'm the new host of the Bear Grylls podcast.
It'd be a really boring podcast if I had to do it all. Yeah.
Good to have you, Seth. Hey, I've been doing some mule training this week, boys. Did y'all know that?
No,
You
I
didn't?
did.
I didn't know that.
It's just okay.
Was that on the Instagram page?
Yeah, it's on the Instagram.
He looked at you like that was an assignment.
I did see the
I'm
real.
offended. I'm offended.
I did see the reel of you reading your podcast off the screen.
What archetype is that?
No. Yeah, I've been doing some mule training. Banjo.
Oh,
got
I
a
did see
mule.
that.
Oh, okay,
I did
great,
see Banjo.
Great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can go back and like it or something. So Banjo is he's coming on 3 years old. Banjo is Izzy's full brother.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Full brother. So same mare, same jack donkey. Okay. But they look different, but they both are pretty flashy. They've got color on them. Banjo, I got him when he was like 9 months old. And honestly, he should be trained right now. By the time Izzy was 3 years old, I had ridden her extensively, So Banjo is not. He's not broke yet, but I'm kind of testing, and really it's just been schedule and timing, and I didn't need a mule. I trained Izzy real quick because I needed a mule real quick.
There's a lot of excuses.
Man, if you want to go buy a mule, especially post-COVID, mule is big time.
The
prices went up on post-COVID mules like they did on lumber.
There's a phrase that's
Isn't that
never
right?
been used before.
Come on, it's
Exactly.
through the roof.
You see a man in Arkansas or Missouri driving down the road with a flashy mule in the back of his trailer. He might as well be driving a Benz.
Brinks truck.
Yeah, the price has gone through the roof. That is why, 3 or 4 years ago, whenever I trained Izzy, pre-COVID. Now, this would give you some insight into my financial status. I've also said that you can tell a lot about a man's financial status and his disposable income by his mule trailer. I have a mule trailer so old, people don't even know when it was made. I mean, like, I took it to a trailer place, and I was like, when do you think that thing was made? And he was like, man, I got no idea. And this was like an old man.
It does have wooden spokes.
No, but back in the day, I needed a good mule. Didn't have the money to pay pre-COVID mule prices. So I had to go buy just a unbroke, untrained mule. Got it, turned out good, went back to the same guy and got Banjo, training Banjo now. But I'll also have you know that 10 days ago, Saturday, I got kicked. The hardest mule kick I've ever been kicked happened.
Really?
The day I went to your house.
Yeah.
Do you remember I told you about it?
I remember.
Where'd
I
you
remember.
get kicked?
Man, listen to this.
I had to rub Clay's upper thigh for half an hour. I think he's faking.
He told me that 3 years ago.
No, okay. I was getting Banjo. I'd taken Banjo to another pasture. And he's not very good in the trailer. He's only been in the trailer a couple times. He'll go in and out good, though, which is a training feat. He'll go in and out. He was coming. I untied him and was backing him out. So I'm on the back of the trailer. His, tail and rear end and legs are all, right here. I've opened the door. He's backing out. He's dragging his lead rope because I've untied him from the front. And so he gets his back feet on the ground. He drops his front feet on the ground. So his back feet are like 5 feet away from me. Okay? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, my feet are even with his front feet.
You're not in kicking
his
position.
head's
You're out by his
still in the
shoulders.
trailer. His lead rope is about to drop to the floor of the trailer, which has mule dung in it.
Right.
So rather than let the rope drag through the mule dung, I reach real fast to grab the rope before it hits the ground in the trailer. I never even saw it happen. My head is this way, and all of a sudden I just feel just a whop, just a bam. And I turn around, And Banjo is just standing there just like he was before. Like, I actually don't even have any real evidence that he's the one that kicked
You got
him.
struck by lightning.
That sucker, I mean, he must have come up off his front feet, turned like this, and just given me a bam. But
With his front foot?
No, it's back foot. I mean, I guess. I don't know.
You sure he wasn't the ghost of the captain?
Yeah, it may have been.
Because I got here today and I was looking for him even though I knew he was gone.
It was, yeah, Kolby's experienced the fierceness. It was, I've tried to describe it. He hit me right in the center of the thigh. It was the best place to get kicked. Like, it was the strongest muscle in your body. I think it would be equivalent to like a very strong man just punching you as hard as he could punch you in the thigh. And I acted like nothing happened because I didn't want to give him too much attention. I didn't want to discipline him. It was my fault. And so I just grabbed up the lead rope, acted like nothing happened, and just walked him to the deal. And then
went and sat in the truck and cried.
That afternoon, I was like, dang. And all it did was just leave there's still a big hoof-shaped bruise right there on my leg.
Nice.
Yeah. So been doing a little mule training.
So is Banjo.
Yeah.
Don't reach for my lead rope,
He's
Clay.
been doing some clay training.
Or repercussions ensue.
Okay, here's a little bit of feedback. There was a
I wish I could
guy.
have saw that.
It was wild. There was a guy that listened to the Boone series, and that's what we're going to talk about on this one. This Bear Grease podcast is going to be on the Boone series, on the Boone Part 1. There was a guy that said, great episode, Clay, when the son, Nathan Boone, speaks about camping on the mouth of Campaign Creek north of Point Pleasant. He said it brought legitimate cold chills. He said, I had heard about that in college when I lived just a mile or two from there, and I was professing it as truth and being chastised by my hunting buddies. But, by golly, the old college professor that told me that was right. Basically, this guy's listening to this, and we're talking about stuff that happened like 2 miles from where he was, which was pretty cool.
cool.
That was
That's
that guy's
awesome.
name was Brady. It's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. You know, I always think about, finding stone points and stuff like that, to think about back 100 or 200 or 300 or 1,000 years ago, and to reminisce and imagine being, that man standing in that place and how it would have looked different and how you would have felt as a human interacting with nature at that point. It is sobering,
Yeah.
Yeah, a guy, 200 years from now is going to think the same thing when they find that styrofoam cup laying out there.
Yeah.
I wonder what that guy was thinking.
I wonder what he. Okay, scandal. There's been a scandal. Yep.
Locally?
Big scandal. Nope, scandal right here on the Bear Grease podcast.
Uh-oh.
You guys all heard.
It's over.
Do y'all remember when I
Were
told
we
you
accomplices?
Yep.
I am not.
For sure, except for Seth and Kolby.
yeah,
all
not
of you
me.
were accomplices.
Shame
Were
on
we
you.
being
Did we break any
recorded
laws?
apart from our knowledge?
I'm not. I think you knew you were being recorded.
Okay.
No, listen. No, this is legitimate. This guy named Alex. So, do y'all remember when I told the story of the game warden at the campfire stories?
I do.
Yep.
I was talking about the Meat Eater
Campfire story.
audiobook, which is, by the way, on the New York Times best-selling
that.
list of audiobooks.
I saw that.
Right up there with like Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights book. That's how compelling some of these stories are. McConaughey was number one.
Hey, here's
We'll
to
get him on the
McConaughey.
render. We'll get McConaughey on the render.
All right.
All right. No,
I was waiting for that.
yeah.
I just wanted to do
No,
it for somebody.
so
I think
I-
somebody was waiting for it.
Thank you for doing it.
I was not planning to tell a story from the audiobook because I hadn't heard it yet. I had not heard the audiobook. So I recounted the story of that game warden as I remember it being told, because it was told to me very quickly, just as somebody was like, hey, this audiobook. And I said, what kind of stories? And he's like, man, there's a story about this and a story about that. So, Seth, I was advertising for this audiobook saying, hey, you got to check out Meat Eater's new audiobook. And I said, there's this one story, and I tell a story, And turns out I was way off from what happened. And so this guy named Alex, he did a good job. He, and Alex was the tipping point, okay? Because I had a couple other people tell me, say like, Clay, you butchered that story. And I didn't think much of it. Just kind of like, well, dang, I wish I hadn't. But I didn't. And this guy, he was very polite, but he said, Clay, he said, after hearing you tell that story, and then hearing the real story, he said, it kind of discredits you because I wonder how much you embellish other stories.
Oh.
Cut to the quick.
Ouch.
And I responded back to him. He was very nice. He said, I love the podcast. He said, that's why I'm writing you. He said, I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah.
And
You
I
got
wrote
called
him,
on the carpet.
I did. And I wrote him back. And what he thought happened was that I'd heard the story and then just told it way bigger, fully knowing the story. And I explained to him, I was like, man, that was a mistake. I said, I'd actually never even heard the story, and I recounted it. So
what you're saying is that we need a full-time fact checker on every story
if you
tell.
spend much time talking, you better have a fact checker.
I'm pretty sure there's a proverb about that.
Oh, is there?
I blame the dozer. I've put this ever since you've been on that dozer.
Man,
And the hum from that engine will shake some things loose.
I have a song that is the best song ever written about dozer. I'm not going to sing it.
Of all the dozer songs out there,
No,
this one is number
really.
one.
I think a lot of people that listen to that would have been like, "What?" Because, so anyway, my deepest apologies.
Well, you made a mistake.
Yes.
And you owned up to it.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. He wasn't making a big deal about it, but when he said that it reduced my credibility, that was like, I don't want that, because
Good to cover it.
I was thinking about something. I was thinking about this idea of embellishing stories, and Seth is a storyteller and a writer.
Yep.
And I mean, me and somebody else could go do something together, and they come back and tell a story, and then I tell the same story. And I look at the dude and was just like, man, we were on different planets when that happened, if that story is the way you remember it. Like, there's something to be said for a good story. I mean, I deeply value the truth. I mean, like, always have, always will. And anyway, sometimes people kind of want to say that somebody that tells good stories is embellishing a story. Anyway.
Well, I mean, first of all, that's a very Southern thing, right? I mean, we all know Southern storytellers, and Southern storytellers are just renowned
they're pointing
for
at Brent.
embellishing a good story. But I think, to your point, stories a lot of times are about perception, about history, about how you interpret the world. I mean, we can all be given a set of facts, but those facts and what we make of them, what we mean. I mean, that's why lawyers exist, to tell stories to juries and to take these facts and to help them interpret it in ways that are favorable to their client, because everybody sees things differently.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not arguing for postmodern thought here. I'm just saying there are ways to interpret stories.
Yeah.
In very different ways.
Man, I always said in 30 years of law enforcement, if you want two different stories to something, get two eyewitnesses to the same incident. Because you can have folks standing right side by side each other, and they tell you the absolute honest truth as they saw it, and it don't go together.
Man, that's so wild too, and it applies to Boone, because Boone, so much of what we know about Boone didn't come from Boone. I mean, actually, very little of it did. We have accounts of Boone, like as he wrote letters, like kind of like business transactions. The one interview with Boone that actually is out there was that John Filson interview from the chapter in the book. But Filson, everybody that knew Boone said that Filson took incredible liberty and basically wrote it in this beautiful, like, if you read that, it's like very, like it's not in Boone's voice. And so it's kind of, even though Boone himself said every word of it was true, but it's not in Boone's voice. It's like it's written in a different way. But that's, so all these things are secondhand that we know about Boone. And man, that is actually a great example of a story just two people down, because the guy that told me the story had heard the real story. He told it to me, and I'm not blaming him. He told it to me, and I mean, I had no intent of remembering the story. and then one story later, it's pretty different from what actually happened.
Well, it's like that old telephone game, in school, where you start the story out at this desk, and by the time it gets to the last kid in the last row, it's nothing even close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you think about history and how hard it is to track history, especially history as deep as Boone and these things. I mean,
well, we appreciate his contribution to keep our podcast above board.
Yes, he had a couple other things. Oh yeah, he did good. This guy Alex, we'll call him the whistleblower. He was
He
pretty,
can't be the whistleblower because you told everybody his name.
Well, I'm not giving his last name. And this is a compliment to him. Do you think I'm training people to send me real harsh criticism? I'm real nice to this guy.
Oh, I got to train them.
No, he was pretty worked up, and so was I about using the word poisonous instead of venomous. Man, I'm the one. I tell people that, and then when I make the podcast, I said poisonous probably 6 times.
Yeah.
And partly that was because these podcasts are recorded at different times. So when I'm like sitting at my desk, like doing a voiceover and I'm really intentional, I'll do it right. But if I'm out like talking to somebody, I might do it wrong. So he is very right. The correct way to describe a snake that when it bites you, it might hurt you real bad is venomous, not poisonous. Okay. Did you know that, Seth?
I did know that because my son Isaac, who loves the outdoors, he tells me all the time, Dad, that's not a poisonous snake. And I say to him, every snake is poisonous. Period. Venomous or not, they're all poisonous. I'm getting away from it.
You're like, I don't care. Okay. Alex also had a small bone to pick with me about owl hooting. Basically, he said he's not a good owl hooter, but it's because he can't carry a tune, he says. And he just didn't think it was fair that I was casting judgment on people who couldn't owl hoot. And there's 2 things I want to say, and I said this to him. Number 1, I never said that somebody who couldn't owl hoot wasn't a good outdoorsman. I emphatically said that over and over in the podcast. All I said was, if you are a good owl hooter, there's a real strong probability that you're a good woodsman. That's all I said.
Correct.
Okay.
True.
I bet Daniel Boone had a heck of a
Number 2, the other thing that I told him was that I basically said no comment on the owl hooting thing. It's like, if you can't owl hoot, that's your problem. No, thanks, Alex. That was great. Yeah, we just did a little housekeeping. That's all. I meant to early on describe. We've got a lot of new listeners to the render, Seth.
I like it.
And a lot of new people don't understand what the term bear grease means.
I still don't understand it. I've been here the whole time.
So the name bear grease. Now, Seth, would you know about this?
About bear grease?
Well, I mean, just like, why did I name my podcast Bear Grease
Well,
Podcast?
I kind of know you, so my guess is that I would know. My guess is that because you're a bear hunter, you've been a bear hunter for a long time, and you have preached that bears are good for all kinds of things, for eating and you render the grease down, fat down to turn it into grease for other things. My guess would be that there's some use for
I really
grease.
Expected more from a rider.
That's my guess. Or maybe you just like to bathe in it. Maybe you just slather it all over your body. You just love you some bear grease.
You like bears, you're greasy.
Yeah,
it makes
bear
sense.
grease.
No, that's good. You're right. That's the surface level. You've hit the surface.
All right,
the bear grease is a metaphor. Okay, so bear grease was at one time a really valuable commodity, both functionally for cooking, for all these different things. It was also used as a form of currency. Today, Seth Haines, if you polled America and said, what is bear grease? How many people would even have a reference point for what it is? But yet, its functional use is still very much the same. And so the tagline of the Bear Grease podcast is where we explore things forgotten but relevant, search for insight in unlikely places, and tell the story of Americans who live their lives close to the land. And so bear grease also, Seth, if you will notice, I'm holding a jar of bear grease in my hands, folks, and there is about a 2-inch band of amber clear liquid, and then below that is a solid white liquid.
That's called a bilayer.
This is bear grease that has separated. And at that separation point, many people, including Native Americans, have used that to forecast the weather because it moves with barometric pressure, and it's highly nuanced. I mean, I'm not saying that I really can, but it does change about every day.
When it looks like that, it means it's hot outside.
Well, there's my chart right there. I'm going to get y'all a chart. Bear grease weather forecasting chart. So insight in unlikely places. So bear grease is a metaphor. Okay, so I just want to say that because we're getting new listeners. Bear grease is a metaphor for things forgotten but relevant. That's why I interviewed Roy Clark. That's why I interviewed James Lawrence. That's why we're talking about Daniel Boone. We're looking for insight in unlikely places. That's why we're talking about how snakes and this innate fear of snakes and our mothers telling us not to do it is this like bigger picture of how human relationships are supposed to work. Don't pick up that snake and you believe her because the snakes are scary and you do what she says and you trust her. It's this bigger picture insight. So that is, and I love it. This is the bear grease render, which is where the act of taking solid bear fat, like raw bear fat off of a freshly harvested bear, melting it down into a liquid oil is called rendering.
How long does a render actually take in real life when you're rendering bear grease?
You can render bear fat very quickly, like 9 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. It is all dependent upon temperature.
Okay, give me the 10-second process. How you do it?
There's the best practice. I'm not even going to give you best practice. You take a fillet of white bear fat, which it'll be on a fall bear. I mean, could have a lot of fat. Cube it up into 1-inch cubes. Put it in a frying pan, a fry daddy, any kind of source of heat.
George Foreman?
Man, I've never rendered
I'm just
fat
wondering.
in a George Foreman.
It's a valid question, Clay.
Wait, you've never rendered George Foreman's fat? Or
No,
you've never rendered...
Nope, never rendered fat in a George Foreman.
Okay, all right.
And basically it just melts down. And you'll have about 20% of it that does not melt down, that stays, is what we call a crackling. But the other 80% will turn into liquid. The best way to do it is to grind it. Grind it, and you get almost... Kolby, what do we say? Kolby's my bear rendering. You get about a 95%. If you cube it, you get about an 80% return. If you grind it up, you get about probably 95% return.
Low and slow seems to be better too, from what I hear. Like, and the color of it comes out different depending on how fast you cook it.
Yeah, if you cook it hot, it'll be darker. If you cook it really on low heat, like 225, it'll be much more solid. It'll be lighter.
I'm telling you, that low, even heat of a George Foreman, boys.
And it's self-draining.
Something to think about.
It's draining.
Self-draining. Render bear fat and make a panini.
George Foreman Grills happen to be one of our partners here at the podcast.
We want to thank Caterpillar and George Foreman.
Man, guys, I'm serious. I've got a song.
Oh, yeah?
Hey,
Wait, could bear grease, like the render, also be chewing the fat?
It could have been.
Because that's another way to render it. If
another
you just want to
metaphor.
like straight to.
It could have. We should have had you on the marketing team when
there was a movie that made a Northwest Passage. Spencer Tracy. Y'all ever seen that movie?
No.
It's old, man. It's like 1940.
I remember
something.
that movie.
And Walter Brennan is in that, and the guy that played Dr. Welby in that show, Marcus Welby, he also sold coffees, Mr. Coffee. But anyway, another use for bear grease. Walter Brennan. Y'all know who Walter Brennan is?
I've heard the name.
Gosh.
We're not 70.
Okay. All right. Well, to the folks out there that are in my age group, which is 55 and up, I would say, he told Robert Young, that was the actor's name. Robert Young looked at him and says, "Man, what are we going to do about all these mosquitoes?" And Walter Brennan said, "Rancid bear grease. Rancid bear grease, you put it on your arms, and it keeps all the mosquitoes away." Now, surely y'all know that's Walter Brennan. You look
Insect repellent.
Insect repellent.
Yeah. I need you to come up with a list of everything pre-Abbott and Costello that I need to watch.
Okay. I'll make you a list.
That was a pretty good impression, though.
Yeah.
We all know
Brennan.
who you're talking about now that you said that.
There you go.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of, what did y'all think about Josh being able to remember that Boone song. I mean, that was pretty impressive, right?
Yeah, it was.
Always.
Yeah.
Okay, what y'all don't know yet is Josh is he's played before on the Bear Grease
I
Ranger.
have.
A little bit.
Yeah, a
little bit. But okay, this is the segue into us talking about the Boone podcast. Josh has a little song for us.
A little something out of the archives.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Let's hear it.
Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man, with an eye like an eagle and as tall as a mountain was he.
That's right.
Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big
Dan
man.
salute.
He was brave, he was fearless, and as tough as a mighty oak tree.
Sing it, brother.
From the coonskin cap on the top of old Dan to the heel of his rawhide shoe, the rippin'est, roaring'est, fighting'est man the frontier ever knew. Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man, and he fought for America to make all Americans free. What a boon, what
This is
a
a
do,
great
what
song.
a dream come true was he. Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man, with a hoop and a holler, he could mow down a forest of trees.
That's right.
With a knife and a gun, he never did fail. There was nothing
Oh, the
he
bridge.
could not tame.
The land bridge
He blazed
bridge.
a big wide Liberty Trail through history's Hall of Fame. Daniel Boone was a man, yes, a big man, with a dream of a country that would always forever be free. What a boon, what a doer, what a dream come a truer was he.
That's right.
What a boon, what a doer, what a dream come a truer was he.
Nice.
And
Nice.
it's all
Man, that was great.
lies.
That is.
He's no washboard player, but pretty good.
Oh man, that was awesome. That was awesome.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. I don't know if you stopped in at an O'Reilly lately, but I use one because we have one right not too far from my house. People there are super helpful. I don't care if I'm getting boat batteries, car parts, whatever. Love those guys. They got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you don't have to worry if you're in a jam. The team at O'Reilly Auto Parts can test your battery for free, in or out of your car. If it needs to be replaced, they'll help you find just the right battery for your vehicle. If you need your windshield wipers replaced, a brake light fixed, quick service, they'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. Whether you are a car aficionado or an auto novice, you will find the employees at O'Reilly Auto Parts to be knowledgeable, helpful, and best of all, friendly. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things do-it-yourself auto. You can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/meat-eater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/meat-eater.
Whitetail Institute launched the food plot revolution in 1988 with a concentration on research and real-world testing of forage products specifically for whitetail deer. Whitetail Institute's research and development team of agronomy experts provide effective, personalized service. I've been using Imperial Whitetail Clover for a long time in a food plot back behind my house. In 2007, I killed the biggest buck of my life over an Imperial Whitetail Clover small quarter-acre food plot. Imperial Whitetail Clover is the only clover scientifically developed through years of selective breeding. Clover Extreme genetic stability provides extreme cold tolerance, disease, and drought tolerance. It really does. Clover is coated with Whitetail Institute's Rain Bond, a polymer coating added for enhanced seedling survivability. They have an exclusive offer for Bear Grease listeners, 15% off Imperial Clover when you use the code BEAR at whitetailinstitute.com. That's whitetailinstitute.com, and use code BEAR for 15% off. We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam motor treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that Seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. It's really simple. When you pour it in your gas tank, Seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it clean your fuel system. You probably know someone who's used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again. People everywhere rely on Seafoam to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way they should the entire season. Help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
So perfect segue into, when Josh sang, on the first of the podcast, when Josh sang that song, there were two things. It says Daniel Boone was his
man, a big man.
He
wasn't a big man.
And Daniel Boone was 5'8" and weighed 175 pounds.
Yeah. Well, Fess Parker wasn't.
Fess Parker was about 6'3", and
he was a big fella. He was a big man.
Yeah.
He also wasn't Daniel Boone. He was Fess Parker.
And then it says that Daniel Boone wore a coonskin cap, which that was just like total Hollywood.
Where did that come from then?
Well, Davy Crockett, as I understand it.
Did Fess Parker play Davy Crockett too?
Yeah, he played both
of them.
Oh,
man.
I'm so confused.
No wonder.
Yeah, that's it.
So the same Hollywood actor played Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone. The real Davy Crockett, I think, wore a coonskin cap. Alex, let me know if I'm wrong. And then so when Hollywood got a hold of Daniel Boone, I mean, of course he's going to wear a coonskin cap.
Are you saying that we cannot trust Hollywood?
I'd never said it, Dan.
Because my whole life is based on lies.
Well, that is so great because this part one of the series is kind of debunking some of the myth and presenting the idea to the people that there is a lot of Boone's life that is mythologized and there's lots of stories. Like you read this Boone biography, Robert Morgan, and he every single story he tells all the facts and all the potential reasons why it's true, and he kind of leaves some room for this probably may not have happened or it may have, but there's a whole lot of that. And what's so interesting, and Robert Morgan, I feel like he's kind of the main one that introduced this idea though to the world, which is introduced it to us, and we say it now like it's fact, is that the real Boone was way cooler than the myth of Boone. I mean, he's one of these guys that didn't need fancy stories told about him, because when you really see what he did and who he was, it's pretty wild, But
the closest modern representation I have of Daniel Boone is Brent Reeves.
Oh my gosh.
True.
He would wear overalls. There's no doubt.
Well,
definitely.
Hey,
here's what I got out of that, especially like when you talk about Mr. Morgan's book, and I read that. The Daniel Boone that people fictitiously wrote about was Gerstacker, everyday living.
What do you mean?
He lived the life that Gerstacker lived the life that people fantasized Daniel Boone did.
Yeah.
But I think Steve Ranella said, they wasn't the only folks doing that though.
That's right.
Yeah. They talk about dressed in buckskins, well, Daniel Boone dressed in buckskins. Well, so did his plumber. So the guy at the grocery store. Everybody was. But it struck me that the majority of the things that were written about were about Daniel Boone, that were written about him later on in life when Gerstacker was writing letters home, and the stuff we get from him was written by him. And yet everybody's heard of Daniel Boone, but nobody's ever heard of Gerstacker. And Gerstacker has a stack of facts to back up the stuff that he did.
Yeah, yeah.
It was very intriguing.
What's
to
interesting
me.
too, if you think about Gerstacker, which was from our episode 4, Death of a Bear Hunter, a guy that was here in Arkansas, Seth, is that Gerstacker probably came to America, and this is total speculation. He probably came to America because of Boone.
Sure.
Like he came in the 1830s, 17 years after Dan's death. And by that time, Dan was famous in Europe, big time famous. And so people would have heard of the frontier and Daniel Boone. And basically, Gerstacker came, and he never said it, but they all did. They wanted to be like Daniel Boone.
And that shows you the power of an inspirational myth.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're saying that all of this, much of this is based in mythology or lore of Daniel Boone, and then people say like, I want to be like that. I want to do. I mean, it shows you the inspirational power of myth, and that's the thing that's gone from time immemorial. People look for these great big myths to follow.
Yeah.
And Boone's in that line. He's the myth.
Yeah.
And if he was one of the most talked about and written about, especially all over the world, it's a good fact that, or a good chance that that's who he was trying to emulate.
Yeah. And Boone was the real deal. I don't think you're saying that Boone wasn't.
Oh, absolutely
I mean,
not.
he was. Yeah. Dan, what was did you know much about Boone? If I had stuck the microphone in your face and said, "Who was Daniel Boone?"
No, what was interesting for me is I had watched actually a show,
Men Who Made America.
Men Who Made America Frontiersmen.
Man,
Steve
I watched
Ranella
that
was
the
in
other
that.
day, and I was honestly kind of unimpressed with the amount of detail they gave.
Well, I did, because this is the first however many years. This is kind of the first chapter of Daniel's life, is what you covered in this first podcast, and that show, from what I remember, kind of covered the middle to the tail end. So I didn't know any of this stuff or these dynamics.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to me.
Any of it stand out to you as cool? Like, for an example, when I read this book years ago with never thought I'd be making a Boone podcast. I mean, I was just reading it totally out of interest. I remembered probably 3 stories from this book that I just probably would have never forgotten my whole life. And one of them was Boone's potentially illegitimate daughter. Like, when I talk about Daniel Boone, now I've done a ton of research since then, but before, like if I just met you on the street randomly, if I walked across your yard and met you in your yard, Dan, I'd be like, "Hey, Daniel Boone, heck of a guy." And I would have said, "Did you know that he went on a hunting trip one time for 2 years?"
But would that story have been embellished? That's the big question.
Well,
could you have retold the story correctly?
Yeah, that would have been nice if I could have. No, I'm saying that story stood out to me. What story stood out to you?
I'm cultural kind of anthropology is my background. So what stood out to me was when the Robert Morgan, who wrote that book, when he talked about the culture of the Indians and of Native American peoples, and if you were going to dwell with them, there was an expectation that you would dwell in a tent and probably have relations with one of their women.
Yes.
I mean, that was just that was very eye-opening to me. And if Daniel was a man who seemed adept at understanding culture and entering into groups. So, but it creates tension in me because I want him to be, kind of going off what Seth has been saying, there's this person that I want him to be. And it's not just a frontiersman who, conquered and defended America, but it's a man of integrity. I mean, you spend so much time kind of addressing these valid concerns that Alex, had. And part of that is because integrity is important.
Yeah.
And so Daniel Boone fits an archetype for me that I want to emulate and be in some ways. I want him to be a man of integrity.
Yeah.
And part of that to me means being faithful to my wife.
Yeah.
And so it does. But as a cultural guy,
you said that just the way I would have said it.
Man, when Robert brings that up, it's like, oh my goodness, like he could have actually just been a man.
You heard me be like, do you really think
he
did it?
When I heard that, I thought, I know the look on his face, like them's fighting words. Like,
well, listen, what's wild is that there's accounts. One time, Boone, when he was at his home with Rebecca, the neighbor's husband had gone off somewhere, and they ran out of food. And there's a story of Boone going to their house and giving them food. When the man comes home, the woman says, Daniel Boone came by, gave us some food. And the man comes and confronts Daniel Boone. And this is a story that we believe to be true. And the guy basically accuses Dan of flirting with his wife. Dan will have no part of it and whips him. I mean, like, Dan Boone would fist fight you about as quick as, I mean, he wasn't hot tempered. He was a Quaker, but there are multiple accounts of him just flat whooping somebody. And he whooped his neighbor who accused him of flirting with his wife. And
I know you call him Dan. How close friends are you?
I feel
guys?
like I know the guy, man.
Y'all notice that?
Yes.
The longer the podcast went, he started calling him, well, Dan. I'm
Big
like,
D. Big D.
Big D.
Dog. He comes in, well, Dan and I.
No, that's a great point. It's not. We don't know that Boone had a Shawnee. He could have had two. He lived with the Shawnees, and we'll get into this probably in episode 2. Maybe we may go further than 2 episodes. I don't know, but he lived with a Shawnee and was actually adopted as a Shawnee Indian he lived with him for 4 months, and Shawnees visited him in Missouri when he was an old man. Like, he had like real friendship with these people.
Well, you got to take into account too that that it wasn't a situation of when in Rome do as the Romans do. He was in a situation where that was the culture. Yeah. If any of that was true, he was having to live every day. These folks wasn't getting up and worrying about what they were going to do next week. They were worrying about how are we going to make it through today, and tonight, and then tomorrow. And if he's got to go along with whatever culture is there, I mean, that's
a
point.
Problem, though.
Yeah,
that's a problem.
It's a big problem.
I mean, and you can make bold declarations on this side of history when that doesn't. I will never in my life be in this situation. I would have just said, "Go ahead and kill me, boys. My value system is more important than this." I mean, I'm being honest. I think I would say that. Now, I realize that it's real easy to be like bold and have this valor, but like that's what I would want to say. You would too, Dan.
Absolutely, but then you have to ask yourself: is that armchair valor?
Exactly, and it is.
Yeah,
And I felt like I had to say it just because it's like if we say, well, if you're in this culture and you just do what that culture does, then you just have this really loose value system.
It's not necessarily a valid reason, or it's not a valid reason at all. But you just got to put yourself in that, or you can't put yourself in that spot. You can't put yourself in, as you call him, Dan's spot, because you
that's
you
Mr.
can't walk a mile in his moccasins.
Maybe they wouldn't have killed him. I mean, like the worst case scenario in that situation is they would have been like, okay, I mean, they would have found a reason to have killed you, which is very probable. But anyway, I'm not suggesting that anybody who wouldn't, partake of that would have been immediately killed. It wasn't like that. But it was if you valued your life, you stayed on their good side. If you were their captive,
you know
what I
and
mean?
I think there's two. You've got a group of people who, it's. In all likelihood, it's they're forming identity in terms of interdependence, and so you've got insiders and outsiders, and that's discerned by very practical, tangible behaviors. If you're an insider, you do like we do, and Mr. Morgan said, if you didn't engage in that kind of activity as a guest, it was like you're too good for us.
Yeah,
you're an outsider, and so. It does make you think. I mean, it was that's a complex.
It is for real. Man, I don't want to gloss over that Robert Morgan. Both of my guests on this podcast, I was explaining this to somebody, and I was like, if you were, just think of the biggest media company in America. If you were X, and they said, we're commissioning you to get the top Boone, and I'm not saying they're the best Boone expert. There's lots of Boone experts in Kentucky. There's Boone experts all over. So they're not the only ones. But you couldn't have picked better guys than Robert Morgan. Robert Morgan's in his mid-70s, and I'll tell you a story. we were unsure if he was. I said this on the podcast. We were unsure, like, if he was active at all. And anyway, I looked him up. He had a website. Emailed him, and within hours, he was like, "Please come to my house." And he's an incredible guy, very humble. Like, he's a professor at Cornell University, and I would have only known Cornell just kind of through The Office.
Yeah, never heard of it.
Andy is a graduate of Cornell.
Ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Did you mention that to Robert?
I asked him if Andy was in his class,
and he probably gave you a blank stare.
He was very humble, and he's from Appalachia. He's from North Carolina, but it was like such a great honor to sit with Mr. Morgan. What a great guy. Man. And then, I mean, it was awesome to talk with Steve about Boone. I mean, Steve he's engaging to talk with, and he knows so much about Boone, and more than he knows the facts about Boone, like, Steve was able to put Boone in context so well, you know. So Morgan, you know, kind of had the details and could just walk through his life without any, you know, he wrote this years ago. And anyway, neat guy. Seth, what did you think?
Well, first of all, I don't know as much about Daniel Boone as you or probably anybody here. So it was fascinating to me when you wanted to talk to me about archetypes, because I thought, oh boy, I'm not going to have anything to add about Daniel Boone. But I tell you what was fascinating to me about the podcast and the discussion of archetypes was how you used archetypes to make connections, to tell stories about who Boone was. And so it helped me understand the myth. And I think I'd actually texted you about this a little bit when you use the example of Jesus going to the temple and his parents going and looking for him.
Yeah.
And when you talk about...
And that was an excerpt from Morgan's book.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then who was it was it Morgan that talked about Moses' vision?
Yeah. All that was in Morgan's book.
It's unbelievable. So you look at Boone and you say, oh, this is why he's so identifiable, because he sort of matches up with all these stories we know, all these stories that seem to recur through. I'm gonna go real highbrow here, and I am going to quote some science fiction, because I know that there's a lot of crossover, I'm sure, with your audience and science fiction folks.
Maybe
there's a lot. Maybe
Are
not.
Black Panthers considered science fiction?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah,
there's a ton of crossover.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tons of crossover.
True.
But
Crossover
there's this old sci-fi television show I love called Battle Star Galactica. Came out in 2000, and they say over and over again, everything that has happened will happen again. And what they're saying in the storytelling way is, all these stories that we see, they recur over and over and over again. The story of creation, fall, rebellion, and rebirth. And they happen over and over again. And I think that's what was so powerful to me about thinking of Daniel Boone through an archetypal lens, was that, oh yeah, like that makes sense because I know that story, or I know that story, or I know that story. I can place him, as a character because I understand all these other stories, all these other characters that have existed before.
Dan, tell us about the cat. The cat.
What cat?
The cat story. The Save the Cat.
Oh, yeah. So there's this, and I can't remember the.
You brought up cats on the last one.
Guys, I'm somewhat of a cat fanatic.
Cat cucumber? No, go ahead. No, it ties into Seth's archetype.
So there's a wonderful book out there. It's called Save the Cat, and I think the subtitle's like For Novels or something. Save the Cat writes a novel, and it's basically the author, I can't remember her name, but what she does, she goes through several different genres of very popular novels, and a lot have been made into movies. And so the story arcs, she would say there's some similar to 12 archetypes.
12 archetypes, right? 9 stories.
There's a certain number of kind of typical story arcs, and in those arcs there are particular, she calls them beets. And so each story has the stories that really compel us and grab us, and like Gladiator, things like that have these particular beats.
Yeah.
And once you are aware of these beats, you really do see them in lots of movies and lots of things. And so one of the beats is where the main hero, the protagonist, at the very beginning, at the outset of the story, he or she will quote unquote save the cat. Or it's this kind of innocuous, fairly unrelated, supposedly to the broader picture. The hero does something really nice.
Okay, so he doesn't necessarily have to save a cat.
But I can't remember the actual movie, but
there are movies where he actually saves
literally
the cat.
the reason why she calls it "Save the Cat" is because in whatever movie it is,
that's a good example.
Yeah, that's a good example.
The hero does something really kind,
which is really
human.
similar, in what Seth is talking about, and what Robert Morgan in that book is like this appeal of the individual goes off by themselves. Mm-hmm. Where Daniel Boone was out and he was gone too long, his mom didn't know where he was, and turns out he was fine all by himself. He killed this bear and was sitting by a fire, and look, boys, here's some meat for you. Mm-hmm. And it's just like we look at Jesus in Luke chapter 2, and it's like, wait, where did you go? Oh, he was fine,
Yeah.
But the interesting thing culturally is like a Hebrew reader and hearer of that story in Luke would not look at it and say, oh, wow, he went off by himself. And that really kind of resonates with me and appeals to me. A Hebrew reader or hearer of that story in the Gospels would say, wow, he claimed to be from a different group when Jesus said I was in my Father's house. Mm. So it's a totally
is that what Boone did?
When
he was off by himself.
I mean, is that what Boone was doing when he said, guys, I'm cool, I'm here? I thought I was on the same track as you.
No, I'm not sure what Boone would have done. But culture really determines what we see. And we don't even know. It's kind of a tacit lens that sits there, and we look through it, and we look at Daniel Boone's life, and it's like, oh, we really like these aspects of him, and we tend to kind of minimize these other ones.
And I think what's key about what you just said, too, is like when you as Westerners, as Americans, we interpret that as the explorer. I mean, there's an archetype, the explorer archetype. And what does the explorer want to do? They want to go out. They want to find freedom. They want to fight for their freedom. They want to, enjoy their freedom. I mean, when you look at the way the Morgan excerpt reads, it was, this Christ figure coming from heaven, coming to this new unexplored territory and saying, I'm going to go where I know I can connect, and it's Moses when he walks out saying, I'm going to bring the people to the place through the desert. I'm going to go explore and bring the people to the place where I know they can connect with God, even though I don't get to go there. And then with Boone, it's I'm going to go to the place where I know it's unknown. I'm going to fight for my freedom, but I know I can go out there and connect. And again, Morgan is using those just cultural hooks to help us understand. Like, oh yeah, this is who he was, because this is the way that we interpret story.
Yeah, Kolby, what'd you think, man?
Before I do that, there's an elephant in the room.
Uh-oh.
Here's the thing: you talked about The Office. He's talking about Battle Star Galactica. Dan is over here talking about beets. And we talked about bears. Bears, beets.
Wow. If there was a bullet in this Magnum, I'd shoot it through the roof. Boom!
That's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
That was
Kevin Bear Bacon.
It's killing me over here. I'm just like,
I think
so everyone that's been listening is like,
Kolby,
there's your resolution.
You don't even have to talk anymore.
Dude, you just nailed it.
Do we get to can we call you Dwight for the rest of the episode?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
There's
man.
beets. No, Kolby, what'd you think of it, man?
Man,
what stood out to you?
I really liked it. I think there's a lot of things that stood out, but I think that there's two things. One thing is the aspect of where he was weighing out different cultural things between the Indians and white men, where he was looking at just what wealth is. And contrasting those. So just looking at the cultural norms inside of my life of what I perceive as value, So it's like whenever I listen to something, I listen from the lens of, is there something that I can get out of it that overlays my life that could, maybe like pull off some hegemon that I just believe, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. The other one would be,
let me comment on that.
Yeah.
So that section, that was an excerpt that I read from Morgan's book.
Yeah.
About the contrast between the European and Native American worldview. And it talked about how the Native Americans thought Europeans were crazy, thought they were insane for trying to pursue wealth. Like, I think maybe we all got it in that moment. But if you actually think about that, it's like very rational, like if you lived off the land like Native Americans did, and people came here and were in search of precious metals, which were of like zero.
No
if
value.
we had a bar of gold out here in the mountains, sitting by our campfire when we were deer hunting, trying to live off deer meat, it'd be like, bro, don't put that on the mule. We leaving that here.
Yeah.
I mean, so when to us that sounds wild, but it actually is much more of a kind of primitive, ideology. But it's so wild because our lives as Westerners, it really is. It's sad.
Yeah.
It revolves around accumulation of wealth. And that section of the book, that was one of the sections 10 years ago that I remembered. Boone's illegitimate daughter, and then the Native American worldview was one of many. Yeah, it makes you evaluate. It's like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here, guys?
Yeah. I think that what that jogged in my memory was I remember when I was doing my research, my PhD research. There's a study
we're bringing
out
that
there.
up again.
So guys, call me doctor. There's a study out there called Culture and Research Resource Conflict. I can't remember who wrote it, but they looked at Menominee Indians in Wisconsin and white, American sportsmen and how they viewed nature different. And so boil the whole book down in a nutshell is like the white hunters wanted to quote unquote conquer nature, whereas the native peoples, the Menominee Indians in this area, really saw themselves as a part of it.
Yeah.
And that was the source of them looking at each other and thinking, you're crazy, along with, of course, a history of discrimination and genocide and all kinds of other things. But fundamentally, they viewed reality different.
You couldn't have had two groups of people meet in the woods that would have had different ways of thinking.
Oh, yeah, for real.
I mean, wild.
Yeah. And they're doing this. They're engaged in the same activities.
That's right.
They're hunting. They're in the case of Daniel Boone, he's engaging in their activities.
But that's why Boone is Boone. And what Morgan and I talked with Mr. Morgan for 3 hours, and you guys are going to hear maybe 45 minutes of that conversation. He talked about how the Native Americans had way bigger impact on modern American culture than we give them credit for. Because he said, like, for instance, I mean, we said this, like, these Europeans came over here, they didn't know a lick about hunting because they weren't able to hunt in Europe because of the systems, just the hierarchy of the nobility hunting. So these commoners coming over here, it would be like, I mean, imagine being a new adult onset hunter, 35 years old, showing up and having to make a living off hunting. Like, you wouldn't know much. Native Americans taught these men how to hunt. They watched. But Boone, he was drawn to the Native Americans from the beginning.
Did you just use the phrase adult onset hunter? It's a medical condition. It's terminal.
If you're not successful, it's terminal.
Yeah. So they had a big influence, and that's what made Boone who he was. It really did. You'll see in these next couple of episodes how the Native American worldview so influenced him. And Boone did a whole bunch of stuff that really he probably shouldn't get credit for, and it's not because he didn't do it, but it's because it wasn't necessarily his intent. Like when Boone went through the Cumberland Gap and started settling in Kentucky, he wasn't thinking of an American empire that he was the spear point of. The dude wanted some good deer hunting.
Yeah, he wasn't looking to expand anything except his hunting ground.
I mean, that is he wanted a place for his family to live, where that he could get away from, some of the pressures back home. But he was not like, man, I am a patriot. Actually, we'll learn that he really wasn't that much of a patriot. He went back and forth. He was tried by the Americans for treason because they thought he was a Tory. Yeah. And they thought he was in cahoots with the Native Americans, which the French and the Native Americans were working together to keep the Americans out of the West.
Man, so the real life Daniel Boone really didn't fit the narrative of...
Yeah, I mean, he fought for America to make all Americans free. No, sir. He was a teamster in the French and Indian War to make a living. He was a truck driver.
Yep.
Being a teamster essentially is being a truck driver.
Because my grandfather was a teamster, and I always wondered, where did that name come from? Like, why do they call them Teamsters? And I put two and two together when I heard
he
that.
had horses and mules and a wagon?
No, he was a truck driver.
Oh, and he called himself a Teamster?
Well, that's what that's the union. The union of truck drivers are called the Teamsters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I always wondered why they were called Teamsters.
Just his motivations were not as like pure as what the archetype would suggest, you know.
Yeah, or the myth. I mean, like I was looking at these lyrics too, right, when you started singing, right? That the who he actually was didn't match with the myth that we've made him out to be. And I mean, I think that goes back to what we were talking about in our conversation about, humans are terribly complex. It's, we're not just archetypes. It's easy to boil everyone down in this room to a certain archetypal, type or character. But we're all complex. We're all, in some circles you may be, seen as a complete rebel, and another's a complete lover, and another's a fierce explorer. And that's what I think made the first episode to me so impactful, was because you start to see these layers, and I can't wait for the second episode to see those layers, because I think it does help to deconstruct some of the mythology that frankly helps make him more of a man, more of a human, more of a person, less of a myth.
Yeah.
Tall tale.
More easier to identify with.
Yeah.
I really, when Seth said that, it made me think about the layers of who he was, the impacting story to me in that just, my family is something that I've put a lot of emphasis on doing, building my marriage and building my family with my children. The story that really impacted me was the one with his son.
Oh, yeah.
Where they were on the riverbank camping. Even like the son shooting the deer, and there was a bear shooting the bear. And
he shot a buck.
It was a
Dan
buck.
killed the bear.
Yeah, that's right. His son killed the buck, and Daniel heard the shot, came back, and was like, "Let's find this." There was this sense of camaraderie over this thing that Daniel would have loved so much to experience that with his son, and then the position of being a father and a protector, being aware and alert to hear the chops of the Native American hatchets across the river and saying, "Okay, here's the game plan. Here's what we're gonna do." I love seeing that aspect of who Daniel Boone was.
Imagine if one of us had that story, where literally life and death. Like none of us, we just live in such a different world. But like, imagine if Dan had a story going out with his dad, and people that would have killed him or kidnapped him for life, or at minimum stolen a bunch of his stuff. I mean, that was pretty common. And I can't cast judgment on their intentions, but usually it wasn't good intentions.
During that story, I think one of the things that kind of gave me chills was whenever they were in the canoe and he just pushed off and he put his head to where he could see under the fog.
Yeah.
And that statement's like, I see what people think about him, or like how they view him that particular way. Like it was like some scales coming off of his son's eyes of like, I see you a little differently right now, you know? And just even thinking about times inside of my life of like how I viewed my dad at different times of stages of life.
Think about how masterful that move was, though, of Boone. I mean, how he did that. Like, it was super calculated.
It was very calculated, because I thought, man, you're hearing those chops. Let's go.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he have gone? I thought about that. Why didn't they just leave? Well, it was dark.
It was dark. You can't see anything. I think you got to move slower. You're going to make a ton of noise. I would have just panicked and ran. But one thing that's right. It was dark, and they would have wrecked the headlamps
canoe.
are probably out of batteries. I don't know. So one of the things that touched me about it, though, was when the son said that was, he shot that buck, and Daniel came back, and he said that was the last time that my dad didn't take me with him.
Yep.
When he went out from the fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
it's almost like a rite of passage.
Yeah. And that was significant to the son.
Yes. Well, I mean, talk about a moment in time that's fascinating, especially if you're a hunter, is Daniel Boone teaching his youngest and last son, Nathan Boone, how to deer hunt. Mm-hmm. I mean, he did. Like Nathan told us that story. Dad told me that you don't sneak up on the deer when they have their head up, but you slip in on them. And on that one hunt, they killed 15 deer and 2 or 3 bears. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, that's pretty wild. Like, that was just like common. I mean, heck, we go on a deer hunt and kill a deer or a bear in a year. We're like, wow, what a year. I mean, they were They were wearing them out, man.
That's what I liked about that whole thing was the relationship, because that made Daniel Boone, or Dan, as like Clay calls it.
If you know him as intimately as Clay does.
I'm pretty much like this with Dan.
It makes Dan more relatable, like what Seth was talking about, because I can remember the coming of age moment with my dad hunting. I can remember not so long ago the coming of age of my son hunting with me when all that came about. And I can relate that back to Daniel Boone and his son. How crazy is that? Mm-hmm. You know, that was what spoke to me out of this first part.
Man, so there's something unique and exciting and fun, and Seth would understand this, having written a lot, is that when you really, many of us in the room would. I'm looking at Dr. Dan.
I need respect.
When you dive into something so deep, especially if you're researching a person, like I felt like I feel like I know Daniel Boone. I really do. Like I feel like if he walked in the door and sat down, I would know how to engage with him. It wouldn't be like, I feel like that. Now, whether if that's true or not, I don't know. But so when I read, the sequence of my study of Boone was first this Boone book, and then 2 other Boone biographies, parts of them. And then the last book I got was Lyman Draper. Okay, Alex, I said Nathan Draper on the podcast. Is actually Lyman Draper. Thanks, Alex. I love that guy. I really do. Lyman Draper. I found out about that book. Here it is right here. My Father, Daniel Boone. And it was like I had discovered, and I'd heard him talk about it, but I really didn't know it was so accessible to get. Like, I didn't know I could get on Amazon and show up at my house in 2 days. And so I was like, dadgum, you can just order that book. And I ordered this book, and I started to read it.
This segment of the podcast brought to you by Amazon.
Yeah.
2-day prime shipping.
I mean, like, was deeply moved by hearing Nathan's account of his father, because I included the challenge in telling a story like this is, what do you include? There's just so much. And one thing that I did choose to include was that 2 different people sat down with Boone when he was an old man to interview him about his life. And one of them was his grandson-in-law, who, when Boone was an old man, imagine a granddaughter going to her new husband, man, Grandpa's a pretty cool dude. I wish somebody would write his story, just like get him to tell stories.
Can you write?
And the grandson was a doctor, as I remember.
Like Dan.
And yep. And the grandson goes and spends a notable chunk of time, I can't remember, interviewing Daniel's whole life. So, I mean, this is like quill and ink. I suppose in the teens of the 1800s, it would have been quill and ink. I don't know. He records the entire life story of Daniel Boone in Dan's words. And this too, and we'll get to this in the later episodes, but Boone died a common man. And this to me shows it as much as anything, is they had this manuscript of Boone's life in his own words, and it just got lost. I mean, just got lost. I mean, if you had sat down and interviewed, I don't want to name a political figure because
sure,
just
Dwight Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower. If you sat down and interviewed Dwight Eisenhower, and that was the only part of history, I mean, like, you would probably take care of that manuscript. The manuscript was lost, and then it happened again. Another young family member said, "Man, we ought to do that again because old Jimmy lost it." And so they sat down and started it, didn't complete it, but still had a big chunk of it, and lost it.
So
and
someone needs to write a book
when Nathan Boone was in his 70s, he said, "The family told me they were going to give me the unfinished draft, but they never did."
Ugh.
And so that's part of the reason, though, Seth Haines, why Boone is so mythologized.
Yeah.
Is because we never heard from him in his own voice. We never heard from him in his own voice. The only place we hear of him in his own voice is John Filson, who wrote the very first part of when Dan was 50 years old. Do you remember what made him famous? What catalyzed him? The single chapter in the book. But that's not in Dan's voice. You see what I'm saying? That guy took it way out of his voice. And so, anyway, it's just it's a wild story, and it's what I hope people see inside of this whole thing when we're done with it is Boone had the reason. I've said this before on the Bear Grease podcast. I'm not interested in, and not that you can like critique someone's character fully. I mean, like anybody you talk to, us in this room have flaws in our character. Brent.
I was looking at Brent. I was looking at you.
I was thinking Daniel.
But I don't want to like, highlight or celebrate someone that just had like, it was not a good person. Daniel Boone had pretty incredible character. Robert Morgan did a great job in this book. And I actually talked to Morgan about it. It probably won't make the podcast because it just wasn't that flashy of a section. But I said, it seems to me like you're interested in like defending Boone's character. And he was like, yeah. I mean, that's what I remember him saying. Just because we'll get into more. Boone had a lot of potential for having bad character. He was in debt to a lot of people, spent a lot of time in court over debt, tried of treason. A lot of people, I mean, anybody that's that famous, there's going to be a lot of people that were jealous of him, didn't like him, and he made mistakes just like anybody would have. So anyway, but Daniel Boone. Dan Boone.
Oh, Dan.
It seems a little bit like when you talk, I mean, you just keep thinking about what Seth's talking about with archetypes. It's almost as if we talk about the founding fathers, and as a nation, we needed fathering. And that he certainly lived at a time, and then in the subsequent years, we're still decades and 100 years later, our nation's still kind of forming. And we made this myth of a father who would do what Daniel did with his son in that canoe, which was, let me wrap you up, put you in a blanket, and you lay down, and I'll paddle us through this kind of uncharted territory with some folks are chasing us.
Yeah.
We kind of made this myth. And even the lyrics to that song, he fought to make America free. It's kind of like deep down, just like us, we remember these, like Brent's talking about, this moment with your father and your son. We need to be fathered. And as a nation and as a culture, we need fathers. Mm-hmm. And so some of it's true, some of it's a myth, but we construct this father figure in Daniel Boone so we can feel safe, so we can feel, and so we have a place to head. You want to be like your dad.
Yeah. Man, and Boone came at such a great time to be an American hero. Mm-hmm. I mean, his prime time was between 1770 and 1780, like we said in that quote about his 30s. I've had more people ask me for that quote. You remember the quote about the man in his 30s?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lots of people. That quote impacted Misty and I, such that we put it in our.
I'm already in my 40s, so I don't
It was
like
actually in Misty's office. I would like to correct myself. I said in the presence of Mr. Morgan that it was in our house. It was in our office. So anyway, we've had the quote, but incredible quote.
Yeah, that quote was impactful.
And it was so 1770 to 1780. I mean, the American Revolution was 1776. I mean, that was when we. So it's like that's a good time to, if you're looking for a hero status, to be around.
But I mean, to Dan's point and to what I said earlier, everything that's happened before will happen again. I mean, and maybe there's some anthropological, truth here too. But like, I think that's where we are right now. I think the reason why people are sitting in this room discussing Daniel Boone all these years later is because, I mean, we're at a point, I feel like we're at a point in our history, regardless of where you're on the political spectrum, where we need some strong, character-driven individuals, men or women, but to step up and to say, like, we need to make something better of this country.
Yeah.
And that's why these stories keep resonating, because we kind of come back to these moments of history where it's like, man, things feel shaky. Things feel like they're going to fall apart a little bit. And we want those heroes. We need them.
Yeah. Incredible. Man, hey, this has been a great conversation. I can't thank you guys enough. Really, thank you all. I love every one of you. Thanks for coming. Good combo. And I wanted to show you one thing before we quit here. Y'all see this?
That
Brent,
was a nice
describe
hat.
this.
This hat.
I'm going to put it on.
See. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give that about 10.5.
This is my new hat, boys. This is 100% beaver felt Sing custom made hat.
It's beautiful.
And it says handmade for Clay Newcomb, and it has bear grease right there.
Oh,
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
Right
So
Dang.
They're out of Jackson Hole, aren't they?
yeah. Sing Hat Company. They're friends of ours, and I just got this in the mail today.
I follow them
What do
on
y'all think?
Instagram, and they have some amazing
Very
hats.
nice.
Does everybody
100% beaver felt hats. And the reason that I have this on is because Daniel Boone did not wear a coonskin cap. He wore a beaver felt hat.
Really?
Yeah.
With a coonskin on top.
With a coonskin on
Hey,
top.
what does everybody with a podcast get one of those hats?
I wish, man. Ain't
I
got
take
one.
one.
I got one.
There's not enough
And
beavers.
it's about coons.
there's not enough beavers.
Your
to
head's
make it
so
happen,
big.
Brett Reeves.
Need a whole
coonskin
covey of
cap, we
beavers.
can hook you
Let
up.
me
Let's
tell
go.
you something. This hat was designed to look like James Lawrence's hat
Oh,
that I put
really?
on my Instagram.
Oh, cool.
I sent her the picture. I sent her the picture of James Lawrence.
Yeah.
And so anyway, this is my
Good
new
stuff.
hat.
That's a cool hat.
Yeah, I like it. I'm gonna kind of break it in a little bit.
I like it.
Nope.
Looking forward to episode 2.
We'll keep the wild places wild because that's where the bears live, and that's where Daniel Boone wanted to go, where the bears were.
And it wasn't big.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Maui Nui is on a mission to help balance axis deer populations for the good of our environment, communities, and food systems on the island of Maui. They've shared over 126,000 pounds of nutrient-dense protein with the Maui community. Secure your spot now. Become a snack subscriber and join in helping to build more resilient food and ecosystems on Maui. Visit MauiNuiVenison.com. That's MauiNui venison.com and use promo code BEAR for 20% off your first order.